What is the best way to create doodles and sketches that you want to bring into Adobe Illustrator so that you can end up putting your art on products? There are 5 rules that you need to follow. The bottom line is that the better your drawings are before you bring them into Illustrator, the less fixing you'll have to do later. Hi, my name is Jenna McLean, and in this video you're going to learn the 5 best practices for creating art for surface design projects. This could be greeting cards and paper products, bolts of fabric, bedding, home decor, clothing, you name it. And if you stick around to the end, I'm going to let you in on a bonus hack that can help make art creation faster and easier. I am here in my Adobe Illustrator workspace to show you why. And even if you've never cracked open the hood on Illustrator before, don't worry, because this is really easy to understand. Okay, here is rule number 1. In surface design, we refer to each one of these separate drawings as a motif. This is a motif, this is a motif, this is a motif, and so on. When you are creating motifs for a pattern or a design, they must be drawn separately from each other, as you can see on this sheet here. You do not layer motifs on top of each other during the drawing process. Here is a finished pattern I created with a very autumny feel, and I used some of those same motifs that you just saw on the piece of paper. See how these motifs are piled on top of each other? This is on top of this is on top of this leaf is on top of this. Well, I did not draw the pattern this way. These were the original motifs that I created for that pattern, or some of them anyhow. I drew them separately on a regular old piece of copy paper. I have a scanner at home, so I scanned this piece of paper into my computer and then imported them into the program. If I didn't have a scanner, it's no big deal. I could have just taken a photo and then imported it here. So you draw them separately and then you layer them on top of each other within the program. This is part of the creative process. So if you want to create a pattern in which you have, let's say, a lion hiding behind some tall grass in a savanna, you would draw the lion and the grass separately. You color them in once you're in Illustrator, and then you can layer the tall grass on top of the lion. This is a different way of thinking and drawing and creating than what you may be used to, but it's also very flexible. Because once you bring in the motifs like this, you can make copies of them. You can shrink them down. You can make them larger. You can erase parts of them if you want. You can create mirror images of them, and so on. So rule number 1 is this: keep your motifs separate from each other. Don't layer them and don't draw them too close together. I recommend keeping about a ½ inch to an inch minimum between your motifs. Okay, let's move on to rule 2. When you bring a sketch into Illustrator, it's coming in as a JPEG or a PNG. Illustrator can't work with it. It needs to be converted into vectors, which are really just a series of dots and lines. To convert a drawing into vectors, you go over here to this panel called the Image Trace panel. You open it up and it starts to scan your artwork. Image Trace works like a scanner. It scans what you drew. The main thing to know about Image Trace is that it depends on contrast. There has to be a lot of contrast between your sketch and the paper that it's on. This means that the lines that make up your motifs need to be dark black and they have to be strong. By strong, I don't mean thick. You can use a very fine point pen or marker to create motifs, but the lines need to be dark black. To give you an example, here is a shell drawing that was done in pencil. If I opened up the Image Trace panel over here and wanted to turn this into vectors, a lot of this gray shading, it's going to drop out. It's not going to show up once Image Trace is done tracing it. These outer lines of the shell will probably all show up because they're kind of dark and strong. So are these here. But some of these shaded areas that were done with pencil, they're not going to show up. In contrast, here is a drawing of a shell that was done with a marker or pen. And some of these lines are very thin, but they're strong. There is a lot of contrast here between the line and the piece of paper it was drawn on. As a result, I would recommend staying away from pencil drawings unless you have made an effort to create really good contrast. For what it's worth, I always create my motifs in pencil first, but to avoid problems in Illustrator when I'm done with the sketch, I trace over it on tracing paper with micron markers. If your lines are too weak or faint, they'll fall apart in the image trace process. They'll end up looking broken or they will disappear. Also, if you use a colored marker or colored pencils, there may not be enough contrast between your drawing and the piece of paper that it's on. What's rule number 3? Do not draw on textured paper. This means paper with a linen-like texture or cold press watercolor paper, which is the one that has the little depressions in it. I usually draw on plain old copy paper or in a sketchbook that has smooth paper. Why is that? Well, it goes back to the image trace process that I was just talking about. If you draw on textured paper, the image trace scanner in Illustrator will see a lot of the little lines or the depressions on textured paper and will register them as marks as though they were little spots of ink. So if I had drawn these on textured watercolor paper and image traced it, there could have been a cajillion little speckles all around and even underneath the motifs, and it's a real mess to clean up. Okay, let's move on to rule number 4. Once you have vectorized your motifs, you can color them in, which is super easy to do. Here is a drawing that I did of some botanicals. I'm going to zoom in on this so I can show you what I'm talking about. Let's say that I want to start coloring in this flower here, and I want to start with this petal. I can select it. I can choose this particular shade of purple, and then if I want to fill it in, I could activate a tool over here called the live paint bucket and go like that, and there it is. It's filled in. Notice that the shape was closed before I did that. This shape is closed, this shape is closed, this one is too, but this one is not. Illustrator will not let me fill it in with color. Rule number 4 is to make sure that your shapes are closed if you want to color them in. So watch what happens. I can go to this one, I can color in this outline, but if I want to use the live paint bucket tool, nothing is happening. And that's because Illustrator will not fill in a shape that is open. So rule number 4 is to make sure that your shapes are closed if you want to color them in. Therefore, when you draw, go slowly and make sure that your shapes are closed. And this can be tough to do if you're working with teeny weeny little motifs or shapes. So my advice to you is to not draw things too small. If you draw things bigger than your intended purpose, you can always shrink them down with just one click. But if you accidentally don't close a shape, you can fix it in Illustrator, but to be honest, it's a hassle. Let's go to the last rule, rule number 5. If lines are attached to each other, Illustrator can only color them in with one color. And I want you to take a look at this group of flowers here. Here are the stems, and here are some of the petals. And notice that this stem is attached to this petal. These are all connected to each other via lines. This stem is connected to this petal, and so is this one. Now, these petals are not connected to this. Watch what happens if I decide to color this in. I click on this particular group of flowers. I really just want to make the stems green. Well, look at what happened. Illustrator is going to turn everything green that happens to be connected. But if you take a look here, there is a little bit of space between this flower and the stem. Here, the stem is directly attached to the flower. So watch what happens. I select this. I just want the stem to be green. I click on the green. Everything turns green. But if you'll notice, this is left alone because it's not attached right here. If I click on this and I want to make it this shade of pink, it's going to make it pink. So when you're drawing your motifs, make sure to leave a little bit of space between pieces that you want to color differently. Here is a floral pattern that I created, and when I drew these flowers, I had to make sure that when I drew them, these stems did not touch these petals. Otherwise, I wasn't going to be able to color them in the right way. Let me zoom in. You go over here, you hit the magnifying glass, you draw it over a section, and if you look closely, I'll zoom in on this some more, This is not connected to this, and this is not connected to this. The same thing here and the same thing here. Keep that in mind when you're drawing. Leave a little space between pieces of your motif that you want to be different colors. If you want to attach them later, you can do that. You can bring them together and mold them into one piece once you're done coloring them in. Okay, here's my bonus tip, one of my favorite hacks. Let's say you drew a motif like this on paper and you brought it into Illustrator. I wish when I was drawing it that I had colored the whole thing in. I want to get rid of these lines here. I want this to be all one color. Easy peasy. You select it. There is a tool over here called the Shape Builder tool. The keyboard shortcut is Shift M. You just take it, zip it through, and you are done. Let me do this one. See how fast that is to color things in? Now, as you can see, some of these didn't fill in. Why? Because they're not closed shapes. That is not closed, and neither is that. So this is yet another reason why you need to close your shapes. But if you're creating a sketch on paper and you've got some good outlines like this, but if you're too lazy to fill it in with marker, all you have to do is activate the Shape Builder tool, just run it through the sketch, and it will turn it all into a colored item that you can then color in any color you want. I hope you enjoyed this lesson on prepping your artwork for Illustrator. You can also import block prints and silkscreened art, and the same 5 rules apply. I'll be doing more videos with tips in the near future, so please subscribe to this channel so that you're notified when a new one comes out.